Hello? This is my third attempt to record this video. The first time I got like 20 minutes in, and then I went into OBS, and I noticed that the microphone wasn't recording. Normally I have OBS open on another monitor, so I'd be able to see something like that right away. And then the second time I realized, I should change the screen layout so that my camera down here doesn't end up blocking the slides. If you've seen my videos before, often I get to the bottom of the slide and then I awkwardly move my camera out of the way so you can read the rest of the text. But I can't really do that so well because I don't have OBS open. And I thought about making a layout where you can see the whole screen and then also the camera. But then the text got really small, and I was like, is there even any point to doing that? So I think my elegant solution will just have to have the camera in the way of the text, and you'll just have to trust me that I'm reading out all of the text. Oh, what a mess! What a nightmare! I hate re-recording stuff because it's so awkward to like read, a little joke that I wrote in the slides and to laugh at it again as if I hadn't just laughed at it a second ago. There's no like surprise anymore. I really feel like I'm faking it. Even this meta explanation I recorded last time on the take that crashed, and now I'm doing it again. It's really maddening, but it's not that bad. Like I haven't really gotten too far into the recording yet. Yes, 20 minutes is not too far. This is gonna be a marathon video. Anyways, Emily in Paris. This is about the Netflix show Emily in Paris. I was staying with some friends over the holidays. In my room, they had one of those smart TVs that just lets you watch Netflix right on the TV. And this is, oh my gosh, is this frozen? Is OBS frozen? No. Why is my trackpad not working? Why is Slack here? Okay, I can use spacebar. But why is my trackpad not working? Where's my cursor? I don't care. I'm just gonna use spacebar. I can't stop recording. Oh, is it? It's because the drawing tablet. Oh my god. This has been the worst video recording experience of my entire life. This is so cursed. I just want to talk about this show. This cursed show and my cursed experience with it. I guess this is appropriate. Oh, anyways, so I've never had any sort of streaming service. I do consume stuff like YouTube content very algorithmically. Videos will pop up on my front page and I'll just watch them. But for most stuff, I don't really get fed suggestions. I very deliberately choose what to download and watch. So the idea of Netflix being like, yo, it's Emily in Paris time. Season 2 is out. This is the most watched show in Canada. Check it out, check it out, check it out. That in itself had so much novelty. I kind of wanted to just dunk my face in the trough and see what content they had chosen for me. And I had heard of Emily in Paris before. On Twitter, I saw an article that called it the most vapid show of all time. I couldn't help but read it. I wanted to know what was up with the most vapid show of all time. And even the article really didn't leave much of an impression on me. Even the article seemed very superficial, but that idea remained. So when I saw the show itself advertised so prominently on Netflix, I had a real morbid curiosity, and eventually that overpowered me. And so when I wrote these slides, this video took a long time to make for reasons we'll get into later. But at the time I was going to Montreal soon. Clearly I am in Montreal now, which has been great. Montreal is Canada's Paris, you would say. It's the biggest French-speaking city. It's just a big city in general. I was like, okay, yeah, to preview what Emily in Montreal will be like. Let's watch Emily in Paris. Not that I thought at all, it would be a realistic expectation for my time in Montreal, but I'm not really sure what I expected, but what I found when I watched the show was complicated, and we're really gonna dive into it. We're gonna talk about this on the artistic level, just what I think of it as a piece of art, as a piece of entertainment. We're going to talk about the societal messages that the series sends and what I think of those and how it relates to my own deeply held beliefs. And then we're going to talk about how this show personally affected me. And it's going to get personal, like really personal. So be warned, we're getting into some shit. Okay. So I would say the show does have a thin shroud of quality. It's fine for what it is. Most of the characters are well defined. They have big, likable personalities. And beyond likable, I actually did like some of them. I like Luke. I like Sylvie. I like Pierre Cadeau. That's about it. I guess I kind of liked Emily's American boss, who shows up near the end. She was very funny. Camille's parents, I liked as characters. Kind of, I don't know. Really, though, what it was that I felt caught up in everyone's life. Because their personalities were so big, I wanted to see how they would clash with future events. And I didn't really feel sympathetic for any of them. I didn't really feel like invested in any of them. But I couldn't really look away. And I think the trick is they just got all of the actors and actresses to be really attractive, and they dress them up like a poisonous frog. So you can't not look at them. On a deep animal level, you perceive them as something that needs attention and cannot be looked away. The writing is what I would call kind of like clevercore, hee-hee-hee-eyes, make it into a GIF type writing. You know what I'm talking about? That it seemed to be a huge trend for a while. Thankfully, it's kind of dying down now, but you still see it quite a bit, where people will just post GIFs of like 5 frames of a show plus like the subtitle of what the character is saying in those frames. And I feel like TV show writers are now like writing towards that end, because that's like how the show actually persists and gets the most attention. I just assume that all shows are kind of written like this in their dialogue, like all these shows that I'm not watching that I know are very popular. I'd say there's like 2 major elements. One is the very sincere kind of like screed monologue where a character, see, in the first take I imitated this. And now I don't want to imitate it again because it's just so embarrassing to do this sort of thing twice. I don't know how professionals do it. I don't know how professionals do like 20 takes. It's so embarrassing. Whatever. You know the type of monologue I'm talking about, where a character really sincerely espouses their beliefs and talks about who they are as a person and how that gives them the perspective to say what they're saying. And these never at all landed with me. I was never convinced by what the characters were saying. But they were consistent. They always arrived with good dramatic timing. And they were very punchy, you know. They had impactful statements and a good kind of build-up and climax and the mic drop type moment. Then there was also jokes. I watched it and I said, all right, this is a joke. They're often pretty bawdy, pretty lewd, sometimes puns, lots of, you know, callbacks and self-references, whatever. Fine, it's humor. There was one part that made me laugh. I don't feel embarrassed to admit this. I do think this was like a really funny scene. In this episode, Emily wants to understand French culture a little better. She goes to a Godard movie. And then later, there's a scene where she's trying to write a letter to her friend, a really sincere apology letter. But her French is like so terrible. And they have this like very dramatic reading with like the same framing and the same music and the black and white of the Godard movie. But it's like this horribly broken French. That cracked me up. That made me laugh. So, you know, that was good. So what really sells it, though, I think, is the way the plot is crafted. It's extremely, extremely, extremely catchy. And normally, if I'm talking about a plot that makes you want to keep watching it, I would use a word like compelling or captivating. But it's not quite that. It's just catchy. I wasn't really transfixed with speculation. I wasn't, you know, building up this idea of, oh, this is how it's going to progress, and I got to find out, will this be subverted or fulfilled? I got to know how these themes will build up, how these characters will grow. There was nothing drawing me in that way. Instead, it was just this very idle feeling of like, I guess I'll watch another episode. And Netflix, I didn't know this, but this is terrifying. Netflix will just automatically play the next episode unless you actively stop it. So just by doing nothing, I just kept consuming it. It felt like eating chips out of a bag of chips, and we'll come back to that example later. It's a very common example people use for like insubstantial entertainment, but it's a good one. So this is just binge watching, right? Like, a lot of people do this with a lot of shows. I generally don't. I'm the type that likes to watch, like, at most one episode of something a day. Ideally, one episode of something a week. I like watching stuff as it airs, week by week. So it's kind of weird, you know, this experience of like, oh, I just want to watch all of this at once. I'm just going to like shovel it into my brain. But I think partially the motivation was I wanted to watch it all while I was at my friend's house, because I thought, if I go home, am I really going to download this and like, you know, open the file and watch it on my own? Or am I really only getting through this because the barrier is so low and Netflix is just kind of automatically tossing it at me? And I did feel a sense of obligation to finish it for, you know, reasons we'll get into later. So how does the plot work? Okay. Basically, you got like some romance plot crisis, some stuff with Emily's love life, and then obliquely, either through themes or some tangential connection, that connects with some sort of work crisis. One of those two will usually carry over into the next episode with some kind of cliffhanger. Then, as a B-plot, one of the side characters maybe has some small crisis with small consequences. That gets cleaned up pretty quick, probably within the episode. And then around this, to pad it out to 20, 30 minutes, whatever, are just lots of scenes of playing around and eating and seeing pretty things. It might not sound like it. Like, I did just describe a lot of different plot elements and threads. But this is an extremely simple formula. Really what this boils down to is Emily screws up and fixes it, and then Sylvie begrudgingly praises her. Meanwhile, she changes her feelings towards some guy who likes her. That's it. And then they eat croissants. That's it. That's all. But what's really the problem here? Do I really expect like Dostoevsky level character drama from a show like this? It's just meant to be fun, right? And it's interesting. I read a decent amount of like articles and stuff after I watched this show. I wanted to see some criticism. I wanted to see some praise. I wanted to see like a slice of the fandom, how people were engaging with it. And it seemed like most people, whether they were for it or against it, all acknowledged that this show is just pure escapism. And I get that. You know, I watch anime. I understand the appeal of escaping into something. And this is a real solid escapist fantasy. It hits all the bases. This is Emily living her best life. She succeeds at work. She eats delicious food. She sees beautiful sights. She pals around. She makes friends. She blows up on Instagram. This is something that I think is a little weird, that throughout the series you get this running tally of Emily's follower count on Instagram every time she makes a post on Instagram, which kind of like pops up on the screen. And it goes up by like 3 orders of magnitude during the show. So it's kind of like a fantasy about that. And she has great sex with attractive men. We'll get into this more later. All of these, they highlight well as just sort of a sensual experience. You understand why they make Emily happy, why she reaches for these things and wants them. And then because of them, you see Emily be happy, and other people are happy, and they're all happy because of, you know, something that happened in the plot. But then later they get sad because there's no thing, and you're like, geez, what are they gonna do? But you know, soon enough, guess what? There's the thing. Probably the most escapist and sensory blissful part for the viewer is just the shots of Paris. They're really beautiful. Lots of drone work. Lots of really nice situated shots where they kind of make you feel like you're just kind of chilling out in a cafe on the street. You really can't fuck this up. That's just what the city actually looks like. And I gotta say, like, the privilege they had in shooting this, the storied, iconic, historic locations that they shot things on, you know, the Opera Hall, the Opera Hall? The Opera Hall. That's where they filmed the Oprah show. The Opera Hall, They didn't film in the Louvre, but they filmed on a big bridge outside of the Louvre over the Seine. Just these really, really beautiful places. And they wasted these most prestigious of all shooting permits on such a shallow show. Okay, time for the negativity. I praised it for a few slides, but now we're gonna start ripping into it. So let's scratch the surface just a little bit on this thin shroud of quality, and there's nothing. Underneath, there's just nothing. Let's go point by point and talk about the things that had appeal and what substance might or might not, in this case, be behind them. None of the characters have any sort of arc. They never learn something due to adversity and then change their behavior in a meaningful way. You know, the way stories about characters typically do. The closest is that some characters will realize that they want something that they didn't want before because of something that happened, and then they go get the new thing. That's about it. It's not like, oh, they've had some profound realization about how their behavior had interacted with events in the plot, and now they've sought to change their behavior to steer themselves towards happier outcomes or whatever. No. They're just like, I guess I did want to date that guy. Alright. I guess it is okay for us to land that contract. Okay. They're at most 2D. I wouldn't say that they're 1D, because there is a sense of like curving into wanting new things. But there isn't any growth. There isn't any moving in an orthogonal direction to the current aspects of their life. Instead, they just kind of like bounce around wanting stuff and then getting it. The writing, I said it was clever, it's true, but it's kind of just nonsensical. And it reminds me a lot of 4Kids anime dubs. If you've seen 4Kids anime dubs, I think Yu-Gi-Oh! Is probably the best example. And again, in my original recording of this, I tried to imitate this a bit, but now I can't. I just can't bring myself to, because it's like, what, am I going to try to come up with like a different example? I don't know, but you know what I mean, right? Like, if you've seen this sort of show, you know what I mean. They communicate almost entirely through like puns and little bits of wordplay and like no real sincere conveyance. And sometimes watching Yu-Gi-Oh! Or watching a show like this spell is just broken, and you're just like, what the fuck? What is anyone saying? They're just babbling on and on. This is like nonsense. And I have a theory about this. I didn't put it in the slides, and I only thought of it while I was recording the first take, but I am going to go into it again because I think this is interesting. I think this can actually all be traced back to Seinfeld. So Seinfeld was a show about essentially cruel, horrible people that don't really care about the problems their friends are facing. And most of the plots of the show are, here I'm going to do the impression again, because I can't help it, and it's fun. It's George runs in, Jerry, you gotta help me. They uncovered the scheme I had going at work where I diverted everyone to one bathroom and I had the other bathroom entirely for myself. And Jerry goes, sounds like you're in the shitter, huh? Well, he wouldn't say shitter, but you know, he would make some kind of ironic, detached, sarcastic statement that belittles his friend's problems. And then in turn, if Jerry's stressed out, somebody does that to him. And it's just this kind of cycle of riffing and bantering. And I think it works really, really well in Seinfeld because you're never expected to care about these characters. And so they can just throw in tons of jokes, and they can throw in ways for the characters to discuss their problems and, bring the plot lines together and stuff without really slowing down and making you actually care that something bad is happening to any of the characters. But the problem is this form of writing is so efficient and so easy and so funny that I think writers got addicted to this. Like, they don't know what to do without it. So then you have like a somewhat dramatic show like this, where you're actually expected to care about Emily and her challenges and stuff. And, you know, it would be like if there was an episode of Seinfeld where Jerry is moping on the couch and going like, can't believe I broke up with that girl. Maybe another one's not just gonna come along this week. I'm all alone now. I'm alone up on the stage. I'm alone in this apartment. And the studio audience goes, "Oh, no, that would never happen. That would be stupid." But in a show like this, you know, they have scenes like this. You're expected to care about the characters, and yet, like 10 minutes ago, they were just riffing and bantering off each other. They were making jokes at light of each other's problems. They're making puns about things that stress the other one out. And it's just nonsense because these are meant to be good people. And it's like, why are they behaving like this? Why are they in this weird, clever world? But this is what I'm saying. Like, it totally undermines any connection you can have with the character. But I think why this is so successful isn't just because it's efficient and it's funny, but it's another form of escapism. It's this fantasy of like conversational mastery, where nothing is ever more serious than it has to be. You're always in this semi-joking space where you're just one quip away from returning to kind of like a friendly, bantery, everything is simmered down type scenario. Like, wouldn't that be nice? Every awkward conversation you can just kind of laugh your way out of. And I think that's why it's persisted so strongly in so many genres where it's totally inappropriate. So let's talk about the plot writing before I refer to it as a bag of chips. It really is nothing more than a bag of chips. The plot isn't just repetitive and catchy as like a way to get you invested in some other structure. That's just what it is. There's no substance behind that. It really is like eating chips. You never get full, but you keep eating, and it's because you never get full. And usually in storytelling, you achieve some sort of satisfaction via change, from some character arc, you get kind of catharsis, you get some closure, maybe the revelation the character has resonates in your life, or you kind of vicariously experience that change, that growth. But not here. Here there's like superficial change, but the very next episode, the same types of problems are emerging. Emily succeeds with a brilliant idea, but Sylvie goes back and downs her at the next opportunity. She hooks up with some guy, then she wants some other guy. She has a moment of weakness where she acts a little evil, and someone goes, you're becoming more French. But then she acts the exact same way as she always does in each episode going forward, and she has not at all changed. They're trying to like keep you in suspense. They're trying to make it seem like, the next episode's going to be the big one. Oh, don't you want to see what happens with X and Y? Like that kind of Netflix serial binging show. But then the actual mode of storytelling is just like a sitcom where basically everything resets every 22 minutes, and you can kind of tell the same stories again and again and again. And I think this is, again, escapism. This is a type of fantasy that people want to believe in. I think most of us, in most of our days, through most of our life, are living kind of a sitcom type existence with the same daily plots and the same characters and the same occurrences. But we want to believe that there's some sense of forward progression, there's some sense of growth and change and potential. And this show kind of lets you have it both, where you have the comfort of just this kind of like sensory loop of experiences and emotions and the same kind of problems and the same kind of solutions, but you're tricked into believing that there's like progression and there's meaning. Oh, this is a really significant event. Oh, this is going to really change things going forward. Oh, around the corner, something even bigger might happen. And it's like, I think, people are comforted to believe that they can kind of have it both ways like this. And a show presenting that illusion is, that's a powerful escapist thing. But there's no sense of escalation, of gravity, of something that Emily has to work towards. All the goals the characters have are just superficially different from their current circumstances. Oh, I want to have this contract. Well, you already have like 6 other luxury contracts. What's going to change if you get this one too? Oh, well, I just want this one too. I want to sleep with that guy. What's really going to be different from sleeping with this guy and sleeping with that guy? It's going to do it. Alright, let's start. We made it! We made it into beyond the first take I did. That was as far as I got the first time. I really hope this doesn't screw up. Making videos on my laptop without being able to have a second monitor is kind of spooky. So I wanted to compare this show to the movie The Great Beauty. I think another factor that really limits our ability to have any sense of gravity or progression or meaning is the shallowness of all the sensory experiences. They'll go, wow, that was great food. Wow, that was great sex. But they never say why. And, show don't tell. It's not really that fun to just have a character sit there and explain the details of their meal. But there's so much personality you can instill in a character by having them discuss why they like something, right? There's so much more richness in your experience of the character's experience. If it is about this like visceral escapist fantasy, then empower our imaginations. Say a little more. Let us envision it. Compare this with like Worth It, formerly BuzzFeed Worth It. Now it's on Dished. I don't know what the new channel is called. Anyways, Worth It. I love Worth It. Worth It's food is very tantalizing because they describe it in such detail alongside these luxurious long shots of the food getting eaten and stuff. It's so much more tantalizing. It's so much more rich. It's so much more real. The closest things to actually having impact in their sensory glory is the purely visual. Okay? The beautiful buildings, the elaborate fancy outfits, the fashion shows they put on. These ones they'll linger on. These ones they'll let you kind of indulge in. They don't really need much explanation, Here I've left myself a note. This says something, but please don't go too long, me. I don't remember what I was going to talk about here. That's a shame. I should have left more notes and allowed myself to go long about it. But anyways, comparing this movie to The Great Beauty, which is another luxurious romp. This one's set in Rome. There's a scene. So The Great Beauty is about this very famous, very successful, critically acclaimed writer who produced essentially one great quintessential novel and has been coasting off that to become kind of a celebrity in Rome, living the high life, while really kind of floundering intellectually, unable to follow up on his book. But there's a lot of just really beautiful, luxurious sensory scenes. My favorite scene in the whole movie, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this, is when Jep, the main character, takes his girlfriend on this private after-hours tour of the most beautiful buildings in Rome. This is the sort of enchantment and grandness that Emily in Paris is aspiring to. But a key difference between every single scene in Emily in Paris and this one scene in Emily's Great Beauty is that Jep is walking through what seems to be like a museum, and they casually pass these four old women playing cards at like a cheap-looking card table. And Jep casually greets them as princesses. Hello, princesses. And you're just like, what the heck is that? Who are these people? Where are they in the hierarchy of the characters we've seen in this show? What world do they come from? What lives are they living to be so casually situated in this most sacred of all places? There's another layer to it of subversion, of elusiveness, of mystery, beauty that exists beyond the spotlight, that you seek out into the darkness. This quality exists everywhere in The Great Beauty, which is why it is such a remarkable and beautiful and haunting and wonderful film. And it exists nowhere in Emily in Paris, where everything is directly stated as what it is. There's no additional layer. Everything is on Emily's level right from the start. Another show I wanted to compare it to is Romance is a Bonus Book. This is a K-drama I watched under very similar circumstances at my same friend's place a year ago. Well, a year and a half ago now. I stayed there for the summer during the first big lockdown of COVID. And while I was there, again, Netflix was like, you should watch this. And I was like, all right, I'll watch this. There's a lot of similarities. Both of them are about confident, hardworking ladies who work in marketing for some reputable company. Most of the work-based plots for our main characters are about her trying to prove herself to skeptics. That everyone goes, I don't know if this idea is going to work. And then they're like, nah, we're going to do it. It's going to work. Then, of course, alongside the work plots, there's some parallel romance plots. There's some kind of fun slice of life shots and stuff. Pretty much all of the characters line up archetypally between the two shows. I don't want to bother getting into it. Everyone is really attractive. Oh my god, especially the main guy in Romance is a Bonus Book. Sheesh. Whew. Anyways, nearly everything in the set and the setting is beautiful. There's really a lot of these like kind of sensory bliss type scenes of, oh, this food is so good. Oh, I feel so at peace right now. Oh, I'm so happy to be in this wonderful landscape. Generally as well, I'd say a pretty escapist show. It's the same fantasy of like living your best life, kind of succeeding at everything you do, having it all on the plate, going good. It also has this kind of sitcom-y, blendy, bingey blend bleh, where each episode is drawing you into the next. There's some suspense and some cliffhangers. There's some long-running plot lines. But in each episode, there's kind of some beats that recur. There's the sitcom-y stasis. Some tensions get reset. They kind of rebuild some plots. But there's big differences too. And the differences are where I think Romance as a Bonus Book is a way, way better show. I really enjoyed watching Romance as a Bonus Book. Not just because the lead guy was hot. Partially because of that. But I don't know. I thought it was quite good. I was quite impressed with it. I'd say the biggest difference, and this one kind of blows my mind, that they couldn't do this. Like, this is such obvious writing. So Dani, the main character of Romance as a Bonus Book, at the start of her series, her life sucks. Her life is garbage. She's like a squatter in this building that's going to be demolished. She has no money. She has no aspirations. Or sorry, she has aspirations, but she has no nothing in the pipeline. There's some word I was trying to say there. But then she works really, really hard. She achieves things, and because of that, her life improves and changes in really dramatic, meaningful ways. But at the start of Emily in Paris, Emily's life is already great. She already has a great job that she loves. She has a boyfriend. She has, just generally a very complete life. And then when she goes to Paris, she just kind of wants the same things, but in Paris. She just kind of wants the same lifestyle, but with the upgrade of being in Paris now. This is it. Another big difference is that Romance as a Bonus Book is actually about books. All the characters work at a publishing house. She works in marketing for the books that are coming out from the publishing house. And it's actually, about the idea of like, what are books to people? What makes people want to read a book? What experiences have you had from reading books? None of this is paralleled in Emily in Paris with like fashion or with Paris or anything. There's no like themes. There's no sense of it being about anything. There's an actual substantial interaction between the subjects, like the books, and the characters. Whereas in Emily in Paris, the fashion is often kind of just like an afterthought, a punchline. And then in Romance as a Bonus Book, there's this entire other mystery plot line of this reclusive author that the publishing house has ties to, and this major fan of the author is trying to like track them down, and there's some suspicion, and it's cool. It's something. It's always kind of tangential to the main appeal of the plot. It's certainly not why I watched the show, and it's not really what I loved about the show, but it was fine, and it adds a lot to just have like something else going on besides the extremely vapid lives of the characters. There's a sense of something elusive, something you don't know, something that's beyond. Like in The Great Beauty, I think this is what stories need to be interesting. They need a sense that there's something that's not just being shown on the screen to you. Okay, so that's about it for what I actually thought of the show. It's generally bad. Like, it's not terrible, but it had nothing really interesting to do or say. But where we really want to start digging our teeth into it is, what does it say? Even if it's nothing interesting, it still says something. Every work of art has social messaging. Every work of art is trying to convince you of some sort of moral or societal beliefs that the show either implicitly or explicitly carries, either intentionally or unintentionally, simply through what it seems to reward and punish and stuff like that. So let's get into it. Let's talk about the social messaging of these series. The American Way. So there are some things that are kind of like themes in Emily in Paris. I wasn't quite right to say that there was no themes. Characters will talk about stuff like American versus French work-life balances. Is luxury the same thing as expensive? Is luxury appealing because it's elusive, because not everyone can have it? In the aforementioned Godard episode, they talked about French cinema and American cinema. What's the point of a happy ending? Don't you want to see the characters happy? I don't know. There's this ongoing question of like, how much should Emily try to adapt to the culture of Paris, and how much is it useful for her to be just her own person? How important is making money for the success of a business? Is it more about money or is it about reputation? These are like questions that are raised in this series. But usually this just gets as far as like a quippy line. And then later they reference the line for kind of like an extra clever little bonus. But there's no resolution. There's no actual like statement being made about any of these issues. It's just sort of like they make a reference to it without actually bringing it into the series. But there is a very... I would say it is stated. I don't know why I said it's unstated. Sometimes it's very explicit, but it is recurring, and it is one of the more consistent messages of the series, is that Emily is right. When there's disagreements between her and the other characters about what they ought to do, I would say in 99% of cases, Emily turns out to be right. Almost every plotline is everyone doubts Emily, and they go, this isn't how we do things in France. You know, your silly American ways. She blunders, she puts her foot in her mouth somehow because she doesn't understand this cultural gap. But then she has some brilliant idea. She connects the dots in her head and sees some other opportunity to fix the situation. And she shoved past everyone's doubts and says, okay, I'm going to do it anyways. And guess what? It works! And everyone applauds Emily. Even though what she achieved isn't at all aligned with what they said they wanted before. And I think we get more into this later, but, you know, just as a quick example, Emily's like, if we do this, it'll bring the brand so much more attention. Her coworkers go, no, it's not just about attention. We want to have the right sort of attention. We can't tarnish the image of the brand. She does something, it's bad, it tarnishes the image of the brand. She does something else that gets them even more attention, but hasn't really undone the tarnishing of the brand. In fact, it almost tarnishes it even more. But because it gets so much more attention, and on some metrics is a success, everyone like applauds and is like, great job, Emily. But it's like, that's not what you wanted. At the start, you said, let's not do something like this because maintaining the brand's reputation is what's most important. It's frustrating. Okay, so let's look at Romance as a Bonus book. There's definitely a lot of similar routines where Dani has an oopsie, she makes a mistake, but then she sees some potential to do something really heroic and take a chance, and that turns out to be brilliant, and she undoes her mistake and then some. They're no less wish-fulfilly, they're no less convenient, sure. But at least there's some consistency, where the characters are like, we need to do something to promote this book. Dani at first maybe doesn't promote it well, she makes a blunder, but then she does promote it well, and they're like, that's great, that's what we wanted. The book is being seen by so many more people. It's the same goal throughout, at least. Yeah, we don't want to dilute this brand with your American thing. We care about some things more than money. Oh, wait, you did it! You made us so much money! Now we're happy. It's just nonsense. Emily's force is such that she corrupts the very basis of reality in order to reinforce the unilaterally good quality of her American way of thinking. And this inconsistency is where the fantasy really breaks down for me, where my escapism and my suspension of disbelief start shorting out. I can forgive, some other things that make no sense and maybe break the illusion, like the fact that in almost every scene, Emily is wearing like $15,000 worth of clothes and all these like really luxury brand costumes that everyone makes fun of because they're so ridiculous and over the top. That makes no sense whatsoever, because that's part of like an aesthetic fantasy. That's just about the visual language of the show. And if that's not realistic, so what? But this is a fantasy, this fantasy of like Emily is right and everyone just changes their fundamental characters to champion and celebrate her every time she's right. This degrades the already very flimsy and insubstantial characterization to the point in which they don't even seem like people anymore. And it reinforces social messaging that I absolutely hate. And the fact that they warp reality so much just to champion this social messaging is... we'll get into this. So I think the only thing that could be called like a message in Emily in Paris as it relates to the subject, quote unquote, of the show, which is like marketing and luxury and fashion and stuff, I would summarize it as the sacred is only sacred insofar as it's marketable. So a lot of the conflicts, like the work or job type conflicts, resolve around a desecration of something. There's a dress that she wears that's supposed to get auctioned off, and then another company in like a guerrilla marketing stunt throws a bunch of paint at it. There's her friend's vineyard is overproducing these really mediocre grapes. They don't know what to do with it, and Emily comes up with this idea that they'll market another line of champagne that's just meant to be sprayed in like a champagne shower. There's this episode where this really bratty train wreck American actor shows up, and she's supposed to model this $2 million Cartier watch, and then she just runs off with the watch on a night of partying. All of these things, something really luxurious and kind of elevated and stuff, is desecrated through some misadventure or something. But then, in each of these situations, Emily's brilliant marketing mind finds a way to turn this scandal into engagement, to get this on the top of all the blogs, to get everybody tweeting about it. And then afterwards, maybe it's even better, because a lot of people heard about it. Maybe before, wasn't it kind of like snooty and elitist? But now it's okay because it's all over Instagram. There's this like flattening of everything, of all the unique aspects of these like brands and the cultural history that they represent, and the messages that these creators are supposed to be having, the traditions, the pristine. Everything is just flattened into like, yeah, it's got so many likes. And like, I'm not even weighing in on this one way or another. It's not that I'm saying, oh, luxury goods are great. It's awesome to have elitism. It's awesome to have hierarchies. But it really just makes the show so uninteresting if the point of everything is just to flatten it out so that it's like the same. It's just another successful marketing stunt. I think this is what's enabled by the total engagement of the actual quality of things versus just being told that they're good. And I think, like in the end, it's never explained why this champagne is mediocre and the other champagne is good. It's never explained why this watch is so expensive. Instead, these are all just kind of opportunities for some scandal that then transforms into good marketing. This is all terrible for me. We'll get into this more later, but this abusive flattening of marketing is really bothering me. All right, but like, yeah, let's start getting into, okay. These are the slides I made recently, and I really took a long time to get around to making them because it's some uncomfortable subject matter. Probably a lot of Netflix shows are roughly this chippy, positive, annoying, bad social messaging, etc., right? And the ways that this show is unique among those other Netflix shows are kind of positive, right? Like the setting, the way they have this whole kind of universe, this world building of made up brands and stuff. It's kind of neat, right? Like they have their kind of Off-White equivalent. They have like their Gucci equivalent. They have it's not even one-to-one, they're creative with it. It's kind of neat. And a fashion fan. I'm into fashion. I like following brands. I like window shopping at bougie fashion stores and stuff. So it was fun to see Emily's outfits, even if we kind of made fun of them. It's dizzying and baffling to see the way she's dressed up, but it's engaging. But the show, the reason I watched all of it, the reason I wanted to talk about it so much, the reason I'm so focused on it is that it was really intensely psychically painful in many places. And to explain why, we're going to have to get kind of personal here. And normally I don't really get this personal in YouTube videos. I like to just kind of focus on the thing I'm talking about and not so much about me. But I have a few times before. If you've been watching the channel for a while, you might remember back in 2019, there was a series of videos called like My Body is My Enemy, My Mind is My Enemy, My Body is Still My Enemy, My Body is My Friend. I think those are the four. And these are the videos where I came out as trans and I talked about some really bad health problems I had in my youth and some mental illness stuff, and I really got into it. And they went over really well. People engaged with me super supportively. They were really understanding. And beyond that, it was just really powerful to articulate these really personal, deep within myself thoughts to a large, relatively speaking, kind of supposed audience. To kind of put myself in an outsider perspective as someone who is sympathetic to me enough to be watching my videos, but doesn't know me well enough that I would just kind of talk about these things personally with them necessarily. It was really a very powerful and helpful exercise, I think, to do that. So I'm going to do it again here. And I think by doing so, we can tap into an aspect of my psyche that's maybe kind of generally interesting. Maybe it's something that people can relate to once it's been kind of laid out and explicated. Maybe it's something that this is a jumping off point to just sort of explore the psychological phenomenon in general. So I think it's worth doing outside of any therapeutic benefits. Okay, so really get warned. Things are going to get very personal from here on. You're going to learn things about me that maybe you don't want to know. So feel free to duck out at any moment. And if these subjects resonate with you, this could be potentially kind of upsetting and triggering. So be warned about that. Okay, with all that said, we're going to talk about subjective ontology. See, I'm so glad I don't have to record this again, because I find this genuinely funny to give all these disclaimers and then to say we're going to talk about subjective ontology, but I wouldn't find it if I was recording this again. I find it funny, that is. Okay. So, years and years ago, I guess like 3-4 years ago now, I was working this office job that I found really, really stressful. And one of my common responses to stress is to dissociate. I say was, but this should be present tense. I still do this sometimes. I don't recommend dissociation as a good stress response technique, by the way. So one day I was walking to work, but I was feeling very, very dreadful. I really did not want to go into work that day, just because I knew a very stressful day was laying in front of me. And then suddenly, it's kind of like a foggy day, this like low fog around the streets on the way to my office. My brain suddenly kicked itself into this like animal mode. The cars weren't cars anymore. I didn't recognize them as cars. For just an instant, it felt like they were just these strange, fast-moving, large objects. The rules of the road evaporated from my mind, and I felt like I was in danger. Like, I legitimately felt this sense of danger that a car was about to hit me. There's nothing stopping that car from just running up on the sidewalk and hitting me, or rather, I didn't even have a conception of, like, the sidewalk is different than the road. I just had this sudden sensation that I was so close to these huge, deadly objects moving so quickly. This real deep primal urgency took over me. I really felt like I had to flee. This lasted all of like 5 seconds, by the way. Maybe not even that. But it really stuck with me. I think I told this story on the channel before in a very different context, where I was talking about the album I was listening to when this happened in an album discussion video. But anyways, For a while after that, I started to reflect a lot on this idea of the primacy of the physical world. That there's only this very thin veneer that stretches over the actual physical reality that we're perceiving, that we could call the world of meaning, where you actually like recognize and identify the physical objects that you're seeing. And usually when I dissociate, I would sometimes like lose this veneer for little sections at a time. It wasn't necessarily scary, it was just, huh? For much more on this subject, you can read my work diary. It's on my blog. During the time of this job, I was still having, this is a lot to get into, but I was having kind of manic episodes where I couldn't stop writing. So I wrote a very, very, very long diary when I was at work. That was just like an endless vomiting of my thoughts. And I talk a lot about this idea of the world of meaning, the physical world, this confusion between the two sometimes, this stripping away of the world of meaning, trying to break through and see things in the physical world as kind of like a liberating thought experiment or really just dissociation. I don't recommend reading this book, to be honest. But there it is. Here's an example. This is the world of meaning. There's the car. You see the street lights. This says whether the car will stop or go. I can walk here when no car goes. But then, in that instant, it was just like, this is the colors? What do these mean? Run. And then, at work, I would, when stress was peaking, I would sometimes have these moments of dissociation too, where suddenly the normal labels that everything had fell off, and it was just like, what? What are these things? What do they mean? What sense of mine or my possession do I have to any of these? This is in my office, by the way, and those weren't the streets near my office. Too lazy to get that kind of picture, but yeah, just like, it's so weird. Just this sudden total dissociation. Here's a little diagram. This is maybe unnecessary. Okay, though, this was kind of like my framework for quite a while. But what I started to realize is that this isn't a complete picture. There's also the world of emotion. And this is like your emotional responses to stuff. And that's not happening necessarily on the world of meaning, where you look at something, you process what it is, and you have like an intellectual reaction to it. It's a primacy in the same way that I felt like the cars were going to hit me, but with any sort of emotional response to anything in a much more like kind of sober, coherent state. So, walking down the street, I guess I didn't look at this picture very clearly. I thought this was food. I thought this was like a grocery stall or whatever, but you see food and you're like, oh, yum, yum. I see a dog. Oh, cute dog. You see a couple holding hands. Aw. It's a primacy thing, There's no meaning necessarily behind it. Of course, these emotional reactions are built up from years of processing meaning and intellectual associations and stuff. But in terms of how you're perceiving the moment-by-moment physical world, these things kind of bump up over top of any intellectual reaction. So now I work in a very, very different job than that office job. I work in marketing for a tech startup. And I have a million complexes about this, of course, because that's just how my brain works. I have complexes about how much money I make, and our customer base, which has like crypto companies, will use our software, and our funding is partially funded by a venture capital firm that has Peter Thiel on the board of directors. So there's a lot of stuff that bothers me about this job, but like, it's besides the point. Overall, this is by far the best job I've ever had in so many ways. And, those distressing things aside. But really what I want to talk about here is marketing in general. This job has made me think about marketing a lot. And in doing so, it made me very conscious of this world of emotion. This world of emotion exists as a wave that can rise up above the world of meaning sometimes, pushing past it and replacing it as the most outward and primary mode of understanding. As I was saying before. I don't know. I don't know. I think it says a lot about how stressed I was at that job that this wasn't originally part of my subjective ontology. And this is where some of the best emotions live, in this immediate primacy of the world of emotions, in this response that you have to something that happens before meaning, before recognition, before processing. Joy, humor, surprise, awe, weirdness. Marketing is basically just exploiting people's world of emotion to trump the world of meaning briefly. It wants to live in these gaps where the world of emotions pops up on top. You know, it wants you to have an emotional reaction before you think, to create an association in your mind between the brand and that emotion that will later influence your purchasing decisions. This is evil. I don't like this. I don't like this. I don't like that this is what marketing really boils down to. I don't like the fact that people are addicted to so many stupid things that they throw so much money at entirely because they've been tricked on this level to have an emotional reaction to the idea of spending money on it that is totally unwarranted in the actual causality of what buying that thing will do for you. It sucks. So the type of marketing that I do is very, very dissimilar from what Emily in Paris does. Paris Emily does big, bold public advertising campaigns to make different brands feel cool or sexy or endearing, etc., etc. What I do is write very dry and technical articles describing best practices for software reliability. Or, you know, to spice it up, I'll give some very dry and technical talks on the best practices for software reliability. My goal, primarily, is to bump up the world of meaning for our brand. So that when you see our brand, when you see something written by us or our logo or some association with us, you think, oh yeah, I've read some articles by that Emily person. She has good takes. Maybe they have good software too because they have such expertise about reliability. Right? It's about thinking. But a secret goal, using my content and then a whole bunch of like graphics and other resources and stuff when they really start to build up our brand's image, that's not that different than Paris Emily. We're talking about this emotional resonance here, about building up that gap between emotion and rational understanding. Because we also want to make a spike in the world of emotion around our brand. We want people to see our logo and feel, not think, but feel, oh yeah, they're cool, they're cutting edge. Maybe if I use their software, our company will be cool and cutting edge too. So this aspect of marketing, this manipulation of an emotional response, is so fundamental that it barely seems worth explicating. Like probably most people watching this are like, of course, that's how marketing works. And if you really want to dig into the history of this and how this was built up and how this really affects people psychologically, there's an Adam Curtis. Ian Curtis is the Joy Division guy. There's an Adam Curtis documentary called The Century of Self that really gets into it. That's quite interesting. But there's no ideas in there are mind-blowing. We know that this is how advertisement works, that it abuses this emotional gap. But I really, really wanted to highlight how fundamental it is to just what you think is the most incorruptible thing, the way you perceive the world, right? Like I really, really wanted to emphasize this is something that is in the deepest depths of your brain. This fight between physicality, the world of meaning, and the world of emotion for the primacy of your recognition and your most immediate response. This is a fight happening at your brain stem, you know, like the lizard brain. And to really highlight, you know, how difficult I find wrestling with the idea of being involved in this in a professional capacity. But Paris Emily loves this aspect of marketing. This is all she talks about. When she talks about her potential campaigns and stuff, it's all about how will this make you feel about the brand. And all of her revolutionary insights are identifying gaps between what people know about a brand and what they feel about a brand, and making the brand more profitable by exploiting that gap. Usually it's like she confronts the designer, the person responsible, the person she's trying to get the contract with, and says, look, I know you present yourself as such and such, but me, as an outsider, when I see your brand, I feel such and such. Why don't you take advantage of that feeling and sell your stuff to more people? That is it in a nutshell. And this is celebrated. This is wantonly celebrated. And as I said before, this is celebrated to the extent that all of the characters agree that success in this way, the successful manipulation, it doesn't matter what they believed about Emily's ideas before. This is just great. This is the peak of achievement. Paris Emily's proud ability to manipulate this gap really, really separates her from Montreal Emily. Whenever I feel like I'm doing this, whenever I'm feeling like someone has some sort of gap between their emotional response to something and what that thing really is and can really do from them, and I feel like I'm taking advantage of that in some sense to make them do something that they think they want, but really it's not good for them, I feel terrible. If this is like, it'll haunt me forever, really forever. Any memories I have of times where I felt like I was doing this, it's bad. And then I think, maybe it's because I can't do this voluntarily or powerfully, like I'm not good at it. Maybe this is why I feel terrible in general. And it's an absence of connecting want and have, an absence of seeing a situation where this sort of gap exists and I can use it to get what I want. And because I can't do that, because I can never take steps in that direction, I often end up not having what I want. All right, let's get into a specific example of this that has nothing to do with marketing, but has everything to do with this show. And it's going to get even more personal. Sex. So there's a message to this show that dictates much of what happens, but it's never acknowledged, and maybe it was even unintended, that maybe even the writers didn't really realize that this pattern was building up. Everyone wants to have sex with Emily. Pretty much every character on the show, unless, they're not sexually interested in women, but even then sometimes, it very much seems like they want to have sex with Emily. Or even if they don't, there's like a suspicion that maybe they do, and things are kind of cast in that light. And I'm referring to Paris Emily, of course. Montreal Emily doesn't have that problem. Problem/opportunity. Many plot points, many even within like the work sphere of the show and not the romance sphere of the show, are motivated primarily because someone wants to have sex with Emily. And don't you think, doesn't this undermine Emily's expertise? Doesn't this make it seem like, oh, maybe she isn't some brilliant marketer, she's just hot? Doesn't this kind of devalue her insights and make the show kind of less interesting? And it does. Don't get me wrong, it does. But I think on another level, you have to see this as like a whole. You have to think of this as just another part of Emily's more fundamental power, which is, this ability to exploit the gap between emotional response and meaning response. So where else is the gap between the world of meaning and the world of emotion greater than when you see someone you're just instantly attracted to? And again, Emily's ability to seize this gap is what allows her to excel. In the same way that she has successful marketing campaigns, she gets laid, like a lot. So this is from the creator of Sex and the City. I wasn't surprised that there was a ton of sex scenes. And these are presented as like the apex of the sensory bliss type structuring. This is the best of all pleasures for Emily. But also sex and the lead-ups to sex are like the chaotic elements that disrupt the logic of the story. Because Emily is like brilliant, she's logical, she's a good friend, she's emotionally intelligent, she's laser focused on her goal of making money for the company. Why would she ever screw up? Where would like the drama come from? And sometimes, this emerges because she's unaware of how Paris differs from America. Sure, that, that's the main point of the story. But a lot of the time it's just because she's horny. And this really clouds her decision making. Um, and there's this overwhelming power, I think, where her emotional response is so much higher than her meaningful read that she's just encapsulated by it, and she acts against her own self-interests. Or maybe she creates this opportunity from this gap. As I said before, this is like her true power, and it's the power that I lack. But it all speaks to this idea of like transcendental potential. That something that could happen, something, that majorly disrupts your plans, possibly in a very negative way. Maybe it ruins your plans in so many ways. But that doesn't matter. Even if you know that that's the case, it doesn't matter because sex is so great. This is another extremely consistent and oft stated and important message of the show is that sex is so great, it deserves to have this totally chaotic, totally transcendental, totally plan destroying role in your life. So how does that make me feel? Well, I haven't had sex in almost 3 years. Not since I started, not since, the last time I had sex was like 3 months before I started HRT, the hormonal replacement therapy, where I take estrogen and testosterone blockers in order to feminize my body in some ways, and it also really changes your kind of like emotional spectrum. And then, since we're already on a tangent about it, overall it's been great. I love HRT. I'm so glad that I'm on hormones. Okay, we'll get into this. Really, this long abstinence is mostly due to COVID. You can't really casually date or meet up with people or meet new people or whatever. But, as I was going to allude to, HRT has also removed my ability to have sex the way I used to. I won't get into the details here. I'm sure you can imagine what I'm talking about, or you can look up what HRT does and know what I'm talking about, but I'm not going to make you imagine that. And I know intellectually that there's infinite ways to have great, meaningful, emotionally connective, pleasurable, and satisfying sex, no matter what the status of your genitals is. And I know intellectually that once opportunities occur for me to explore this again, I'll probably find those ways. Intellectually, that seems probable. It's happened before. It can happen again, I guess. But on a very, very deep emotional level, I don't feel like this is the case. The big time gap between now and the last incident. I feel like I'm talking about incident response for my job. The incident might be the worst word to refer to having sex with someone. The big time gap between now and the last encounter, the last rendezvous, and the removal of some functionality makes the whole thing feel like really doomed. It just feels like sex isn't part of my life anymore, especially the sort of hetero sex that Paris Emily is always having with a selection of attractive men. Which, again, my apologies if this is too graphic, but that was one that I really enjoyed from the P side, and I won't ever, get to experience what it's like from the V side. Thinking about how, that's gone for me. I don't know what is there for me. That's big, big, big despair. That's something that really upsets me. And it makes me feel like an incel. It makes me feel terrible and envious and self-loathing and disgusting. It's bad. It's not, whenever I encounter it. So, the series, I knew this would be so distressing. I knew right from the start. I knew there was going to be this huge focus on sex and how great sex is and how it's worth uprooting all parts of your life just to have great sex. And I knew that would be distressing. I knew it would be really painful for me to see that so explicitly said in this show that really wasn't doing much else for me anyways. So why was I watching it? Let's, for fun, let's look at the other media I was consuming around the same time. I was reading a book called The Lying Life of Adults by Elena Ferrante, who's one of my favorite authors working today. And as is common of most of her stories, I knew it would be about something like this going in. It's the main plot thread is about a young woman's sexual awakening, and you know. And then I was also reading Tori Peters' Detransition Baby, which is a story of this trans woman, her former partner, who was a man who transitioned to a woman and then transitioned to a man again, and then a woman that this guy has impregnated. She works in marketing as a bonus, extra painful connection, and the three of them try to build this kind of unconventional family around this this baby that's coming up. And guess what? They're all really extremely distressing. They made me cry and upset and miserable and doomed and all this stuff. At least they were like good, those books. At least, you know, they were like well written and compelling and interesting. Not like Emily in Paris. And then, you know, I think about other stuff I do. My entire Twitter diet is just things that upset me. I go on the 4chan LGBT board, which is like the most upsetting place on the internet. I listen to like harsh noise. I listen to shoo-shoo. I listen to the microphones. Well, even my lifestyle choices, even the things I do on a real fundamental level of how I live my life reflect this, whatever this is. And I'm not going to get into that, though. That's too personal. So what is this? Why do I keep picking up snakes that I know are snakes? Is it emotional masochism? I have often described myself as like an emotional masochist, but much less frequently will I describe why. What the heck am I doing to myself and why? Why do I want to make myself miserable? I think in part it's a feeling of I don't want to run away. That if I know these things exist, that these things are out there that I can watch and read, and I know they're going to be really distressing, and then I still turn away. I don't face them head on and tackle them and allow them to challenge me and make me miserable. I feel like a coward. I feel like I've let myself down in some way. This is the same logic I use when I play video games. Not that I'm like, oh, I gotta beat Dark Souls, I want to be the guy or whatever. But it's like, the video games I do play and that I've tried to get good at, the reason they're so compelling to me is that I can infinitely push myself into really, really, really hard things. Like you know, I'm quite good at Super Smash Bros. Melee. Because of that, I can hold my own against extremely, extremely strong players. And I would say that the challenge of playing a game at like a really high level and then going against someone who's way better than you is like the greatest challenge in all of video games. Like I don't even know what would come close. Like the amount of skill testing that is to try to play to your peak against someone who's better than you and like try to figure out, okay, how can I win? I never want to back away from that. I never want to just beat people that are better than me. I want to keep fighting the hardest opponent in the room, you know? So I think that logic is the same as when I'm thinking about, oh, what book should I read? Oh, what about this one that's all about like trans issues and starting a family and trans motherhood and you know, all these other things that I'm very, very sensitive about and that I have a lot of complexes about. Yeah, let's do that. I'm up for it. It's time to fight. Another thing is this C.S. Lewis quote about pain as a sculptor that he says, "Pain is God's megaphone to rouse a deaf world. You see, we are like blocks of stone out of which the sculptor carves the forms of men. The blows of his chisel, which hurt us so much, are what make us perfect. I first read this quote years and years and years and years ago, and I think it has always stuck with me. But like, I'm not religious. I don't believe in some omnipotent sculptor that's doing this to me. I'm doing this to myself. And I don't know. Maybe it is sort of true. Like, I think this sort of masochism, the fact that I put myself through the emotional ringer, helps me be empathetic. Maybe, I don't know. I would like to think so. I would like to think myself as a very empathetic person. Maybe this is why. And maybe eventually, by sculpting myself like this, I can then express something great from myself. Eventually, maybe. This is, you know, the path that leads to true artistic triumph. Not yet, but maybe. But I think, you know, does any of this make sense? Is any of this behavior rational? Maybe. Maybe not. Probably not. Like, most people don't act like this. Most people don't seek out things that will make themselves miserable and consume media that they know will upset them and be painful. And, probably not coincidentally, most people are a lot less miserable than me overall, I think. Most people don't have depression this severe, I think. I hope, for the sake of everyone. But it's also like who I am, right? Without being close to these subjects, without, you know, like feeling like these things are important and they matter to me, without this sense of longing for things I can't have, without this feeling of a substantial absence, without this conception of an other that I envy, I would lose a lot. I would lose a lot of like my mental space of who I am. But I gotta take a break. It's going too far. I'm seeking out this distressing stuff and putting myself in distressing situations with way too much like intent and deliberateness some days. These days. Like, it's not just that, oh, you know, I won't shy away from distressing media anymore, but I'm actively seeking it out. And I always try to have some sort of like balance between this like attack on myself and then like healing myself. I'm always watching anime, you know, that's soothing, peaceful, nothing that's going to resonate with me in some terrible way usually. The pendulum is swinging way too far into attack recently. Emily in Paris, it defeated me. Where Bellatar couldn't defeat me, or where Mark Fisher couldn't defeat me. Emily in Paris is what's making me tap out. What does this mean in practice? I don't know. Whatever, we'll see. What I've done so far is I've started really thinking you have to be merciful to yourself as like a mantra. And it hasn't always worked. Since I've adopted this merciful era, I've still done all sorts of really stupid, self-punishing things and consumed all sorts of upsetting media. And you could say even doing this, although I think it is kind of therapeutic and I'm going to feel happy and accomplished to have done it, was also an attack on myself because I really had to dive into these upsetting subjects, and recording this video was, for a number of reasons, like having to redo the first 20 minutes, pretty upsetting. But it has helped me a few times to be like, no, let's be merciful to myself. No, you know, that's enough. Let's not bother. Let's not worry about this. Let's not obsess over this. And I think that's been good. So we'll try to live our lives. I don't know if I'm using the plural tense. I'll try to live my life under this banner of self-mercy and see what happens. That's enough. That's enough about Emily. All right. Goodbye.